Dative, integrative and preventive healthcare. The content discussed in this episode is for informative purposes only
and should not be replaced by individualized professional consultations or professional medical advice.
Hey guys, I'm Tasha.
Hey listeners, this is Guni, and we're here to discuss lifestyle medicine. So hi everyone, today we're going to be speaking about the ins and outs of menopause. For this, we have Wendy Molefi.
Yes, she is a GP and a menopause specialist with the British Menopause Society Advanced Menopause Specialist Certificate. She's the founder and owner of Vital Wellness Clinic, a specialist menopause clinic based in Hertfordshire. Welcome to Dative the podcast, Wendy. We're excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to having this conversation.
So menopause, for women who are in their 30s, something that we know is going to come, but we just know that our mothers and our aunts and sisters are just, acting crazy and funny, and it will happen.
I'm a menopause woman, so be careful what you say there.
This looks like a black box. So I see the sense of us talking about it earlier on. Are there things we can do to improve that experience? Because in a survey done by the British Menopause Society in 2017, over 50% said it had a negative impact on their lives. Women were saying that. And they felt that, and 45% felt that the menopause symptoms had negative impact on their work. That said, so for a community or an audience that is in their 30s, these are daunting statistics.
You're absolutely right, Guni. I mean, there's transitions in life, and you can actually always kind of be thinking a step ahead. So in terms of why really we need to be having these conversations, the earlier the better, we've already established that by definition, the menopause will affect all women at some stage in their lives. It's coming, so it'll affect.
That sounds scary. It's
coming. I know. It doesn't
Brace
have
yourself.
to be scary.
Brace yourself.
so yes, we're talking half the human race here, and if it affects many of us women who are still very much at the peak of our careers, and we know that women are living longer these days. Life expectancy is longer, so women will spend quite a significant amount of time of their lives being postmenopausal. And to actually give this a bit of context, the World Health Organization estimates that about 50 million women would have reached the menopause by the late 2020s. That's not far. And this actually rises to 1.2 billion by 2030. So that is a lot of menopausal women here. Perhaps we should put a bit of context and sort of have a sense of what is the menopause and why do we actually need to be having these conversations perhaps earlier on in our lives as women. The menopause is a natural physiological stage in a woman's life when they stop having periods, when their ovaries stop working, which means they can no longer have children without assistance anyway. So that has huge implications. That means a lot to a lot of women. So our ovaries, for a little bit of science there, produce 3 important hormones which are vital for many physiological processes in the body. And these hormones are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So when our ovaries stop working or this ovarian function declines, women are deprived of these hormones, and they then begin to experience many different menopause symptoms as a result. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in terms of ages, most women will go into the natural menopause between the ages of 45 to 55. And this is actually in developing countries like America, the US, and other developed countries. The average age women go into the natural menopause is 51. And this actually goes down by 2-3 years in poorer, non-industrialized countries.
It looks like in cities or developed countries, it's coming in earlier. Are there any factors and any reasons for this to happen?
Yes, absolutely. The menopause, I guess, transition is very complex. Other factors that contribute to the age at which a woman would enter the natural menopause include their genetics. So you find that mothers and sisters, and they may go into the menopause around the same sort of time. And then environmental factors. And then there's the socioeconomic status, whether women are working or not, which also includes lifestyle, and also factors like reproductive factors, whether women have had children or not had children, because women who haven't had children, research shows that they tend to go into the menopause earlier, and women who've had more children, their menopause is much later. And then more importantly, modifiable factors like lifestyle factors such as smoking, nutrition, physical activity. So those are the factors that actually contribute to the complexity of the whens of when a woman might go into that natural menopause. About 1 in 100 women will go into that menopause before the age of 40. And 1 in 1,000 women will go into the menopause before the age of 30 for all those various reasons as well.
I'd like to understand also, what are the physical impact in your body if you go into menopause earlier?
That's a really important question, Guni. I mean, we know from studies such as the SWAN study, which is the study of women's health across the nation in the US. They followed thousands of women between the years of 1996, I think, to 2007, and pre-menopausally, and just seeing what happens and when they go into the menopause. And actually, some of the conclusions were that an earlier onset of the menopause, so women who go much earlier than expected into the menopause, it is associated with an increased risk of conditions such as osteoporosis, which is the thinning of the bones, because they're lacking the production of the estrogen. Remember that when you go into the menopause, your ovaries stop producing all these protective hormones. So there's an increased risk of osteoporosis. There's an increased risk of heart disease. There's an increased risk of stroke, because again, all these hormones are important in various metabolic processes in the body. And there's also an increased risk of certain cancers. And actually, they've also shown that there's an increased risk of early death in women, because women are not having the benefit of all these hormones protecting their bodies and protecting the various processes in their bodies.
What you're pointing out is like, if you get it earlier, there are increased risk factors. So would it be right to assume that if you get it later, actually you're reducing your chances of developing different types of illnesses?
It is not that straightforward, as you probably will expect it.
Yeah.
It's about kind of maybe the menopause coming in at the sort of that naturally expected time. If it's later than the 55 years that was sort of mentioned, then there are other risks associated with that. It means your body is exposed, because the body knows how to look after itself, and the body is something to marvel about, really. So if this is delayed later than a lot of people, then the body is exposed to levels of estrogen, of all these hormones, again, much longer than it actually needs to. And then that can increase other risks to other diseases, other cancers, certainly like breast cancer, like endometrial cancers. Those are higher in women who are experiencing their menopause much later than the average age.
A very relevant point that we are making here is like that there seems to be somewhat of a window of time. Is it too early to talk about it? Is there a right time to talk about it? So basically my question is, when should we start talking about menopause?
As far as I'm concerned, with regards to the menopause, it is about finding the right opportunity to bring up this conversation in schools. So where they talk about the human life cycle, puberty, sex education, pregnancy, and I think that's where an opportunity lies there to mention the menopause, if anything, as part of this life cycle, that before women die, there is this element or aspect of their life, which is part of the aging process, really. And then layers of education can be added along the way and be made age appropriate. I'm not saying bombard children with things about the menopause. Another opportunity is at home. It is very important that the menopause is not treated like the taboo subject at home. I've never had a conversation about the menopause with my mum. Yet, as you mentioned, Guni, we all have an auntie who is forever with their fan at every sort of social event. And yet we don't have these conversations.
I wish I could be talking to this auntie that is fanning herself. Not to be honest, because I'm sure that she must also be feeling alone in that process.
Yes.
And so we kind of know that she's going through something, but it's taboo, so nobody's really talking about it.
Nobody's talking about it.
It's true. I know. I was just thinking of one of my aunts that always comes to like any event with a towel, and she just kind of like keeps it on her neck all the time. And now I'm just relating it to think that, oh my God, it's actually her menopause. It just clicked in my head. I should probably speak to her about it and just kind of
in
build
a nice,
some
sensitive way.
Yeah. And so she doesn't feel so isolated.
As mothers, as sisters, grandparents, we just need to be openly talking about this, sharing our experiences and passing on the wisdom. Because really the menopause is not all about doom and gloom. In certain cultures, especially Eastern cultures, women who are postmenopausal are actually revered. They're respected, and they're regarded as the sage in the community. So the home environment is where this conversation can happen. And also at work, we need to be talking about it because women are working. It needs to be part and parcel of the health and safety policy. And as women, we're nurturers. We gather people, we form all these communities here, there, and everywhere, in churches. So there's opportunity there again to bring up the conversation, to talk about it. So I guess the point that I'm saying is that there's opportunities here, there, and everywhere. It's about having the courage to bring it up and see it as something that is vital. And the sooner we have these conversations, the better. The more education and information women have earlier in their lives, as we've already pointed out, regarding the other factors, lifestyle factors, then there's an opportunity for young women in their 30s to be modifying their lifestyles, to ensure that their bodies are just primed for a better transition and actual long-term health.
Right. In the women who are going through menopause, what is going through your head and your emotions?
The emotional aspect of it and the physical aspect of it, they can be very much intertwined. Something can be happening physically that can lead to somebody having all these other emotional complex symptoms. But if we start with the psychological symptoms of what they experience, it's essentially women notice for no particular reason sometimes mood swings. 1 minute they're happy, the next minute they're low. Just, to the extent where some women will experience depression, they report anxiety symptoms. And these symptoms can often be exacerbated by, the perception, the stigma as well. They're not talking about things, or it's just happening to me. And then this compounds, and it's just me suffering. And what must people think of me sitting here, sweating away here? And then it just compounds the whole cycle. Women then isolate themselves, become more withdrawn, and they don't want to talk about this what is going on for them. In addition to that as well, because of the lack of the support of these physical hormones, physiological hormones, it affects the brain in such a way that a lot of women will report that this forgetfulness, a poor concentration, and the brain fog. Brain fog is another buzzword you might have heard that a lot of women talk about. And simply, and certainly in my clinic, sometimes women will come and just sit and tell and describe, or struggle to describe how it is, and just say they're just not feeling themselves. And that in itself is such a powerful statement, because I guess, indicates the impact of what is going on in the woman's body and the impact it has in their lives. And also because what happens, the menopause, is that it happens at midlife. And for a lot of women at midlife, there's all these other stresses that are happening in life in terms of work changes, career changes, marital issues, supporting their children, the adolescent children, the young adult children, and also looking after their parents. So they're like this sandwich generation who are stuck in the middle. Their body is doing one thing here, and then there's life happening on the other side.
Do women feel that they are losing a part of their femininity or their womanhood? Is there something related to that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge factor of that, because let's remind ourselves in the fact that, as I mentioned, these important hormones that play a part in our reproductive lives, our ability to have children, our ability to nurture. So suddenly this is taken away from you. It almost takes away part of your identity somehow. And yes, physically and psychologically, your femininity, you feel different. You're no longer, because some of the other physical symptoms that come along with the menopause, the changes in metabolism, women gain weight and they just don't feel as sexy or as themselves as they are, and all these other things that really have a huge impact on perception and how women perceive the menopause. The other thing I was going to mention is culture as well. We are all brought up from different cultures, different expectations of our role in society as women, and that hugely influences women's perception of the menopause. And in turn, this can then become like a societal thing that compounds how the menopause is deemed.
I mean, since you touched on culture, in your experience as a woman who is part of the BAM community, the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community, do you see that women in this community, I guess, experience more severe symptoms, or maybe have a tougher experience with menopause and integrating that change in their lives? Or like, basically, maybe I should step back and ask, like, what do you see with women that experience this?
That is a really question. What do I see? Not as much as I'd like to see, because from a professional point of view, women from our culture, from the Black and Asian ethnic minority culture, we don't come forward, we don't talk as much as women from Western cultures or Caucasian women, because of the communities we come from. So I don't see as many as I'd like to see. But generally, actually, from studies, the SWAN study that I mentioned in the US, where they followed, it was actually quite a diverse population in the US, in different US states, and women from different ethnic backgrounds in the US. And women complained of different things. They found that Caucasian women would tend to complain more of the hot flashes, the night sweats, and things like that. And women of the ethnic minority women would tend to have more what we call musculoskeletal symptoms, like the aches and pains and this and the other symptoms. So all, I guess, underpinned by how we're brought up and perhaps how we tolerate different experiences or discomfort or unpleasantness. So it's a very curious observation in how different cultures experience or talk about the menopause. The reason for musculoskeletal issues earlier on in life indicates that it's all intertwined with perception. Sometimes it might just be, maybe it's something that's easier to talk about or to report to health professionals, the fact that I've got a pain or an ache, that sort of thing.
Right.
It's more acceptable to present like that. But the question, I guess, in the way, as you were asking, I was thinking, for us healthcare professionals, perhaps that might be our cue to notice when women from ethnic minorities come to see us and they have all these non-specific symptoms, and you know they're of a certain age or maybe beginning, to think about that and to just have a thought process of how you can help them in that sort of way, to bring up that conversation. Because in certain cultures, some of these things, I was just reflecting on this, that actually in my culture, we don't have a word for menopause as a word like that. But certainly the experience is there.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, the experience is there. So it's about finding a way and being attuned to how different cultures and population might just exhibit certain aspects of ill health. I know that the menopause is not ill health or the body changing.
What you're saying is it's essentially like, you know, with any illness and issue, like societal issue, right? It's so complex. Culture is a huge aspect to it, and, you know, socialization. So it's very layered.
Yeah, and as you said, in your culture, in the language itself, it's not acknowledging that it's a thing. It's just reflective of how, first of all, our world is run by men, and that sure, if this is a masculine issue or a thing that men would experience, there would be a word for that. And so that just shows that it has not been valued, and it just goes to show, again, we don't talk about it, hence it's stigmatized, hence females are experiencing a negative aspect to it. So I think it leads to my next question, is like, what can we do to increase the awareness and the mindfulness and the positive aspect of actually transitioning into menopause?
Yeah, what can we do? Again, if I split that, as women, what can we do? How can we help ourselves? So, as I said, because we know that certainly going into the early menopause, you know, there's an increased risk of some of these conditions. And we know that there are things that we cannot change, certainly our genetics and, you know, where we grow up, certain things like that. But there are a lot of modifiable lifestyle factors that are within our control. And for me, that is fundamental in terms of perhaps preventing tipping into an early menopause, or certainly minimizing symptoms or the unpleasant symptoms of the menopause. I mean, we're not talking rocket science here. We're talking the basics here.
Yeah.
Seeing food as medicine, what we eat, what we put in our bodies, valuing that and giving some thought process to what we're eating, you know, all the stuff around. Be more plant-based, less of things that are toxic to our bodies, minimizing alcohol, smoking. Smoking has huge implications as well. Regular exercise, because what that does, because what we need to be thinking about is that the loss of these hormones in the body, it may cause these menopause symptoms like your hot flashes, your night sweats, and, you know, hair loss and gut problems, all these other unpleasant symptoms. But there's also the long-term impact over time, that there's, you know, there's bone loss, cardiovascular issues as well. So we can actually live our lives in such a way that we are delaying those things. We know regular exercise is good for cardiovascular function. It's good for maintaining muscle strength. It's good for bone protection, cultivating sleep quality, hydration, and also keeping stress levels low. As you mentioned, techniques like yoga, mindfulness, relaxation, cognitive behavioral therapies, all these things can help sort of decompress all the stresses that we cannot change in our bodies. And all really, this is all in the spirit of, yes, minimizing the symptoms and priming the body, and so that it just copes better. Some of these symptoms are not as unpleasant as they could potentially be. So there's all these things that are within our control that we can do. And certainly, if we are struggling, we shouldn't struggle alone. We should seek help. There are health professionals out there who can help and talk about all the different options that are available.
And I know you have a background in wellness coaching and also mindfulness teaching. So maybe with that, like, can you maybe shed some light on how using mindfulness will help women in perimenopause or in menopause to navigate their experience?
As you said, as a mindfulness teacher, that actually formed the basis or the argument of my dissertation for my master's degree. So, as you will know, mindfulness is the cultivation of present moment awareness, minimizing our own often self-inflicted suffering or distress in all manner of ways. And among a list of many, many benefits, through cultivation of mindfulness practices, we kind of learn to accept what we cannot change. I mean, we've already established the fact that the menopause is part of the natural aging body. So we learn to accept that this is happening, so we don't contract around it. We learn to sort of appreciate different experiences, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. And we learn to appreciate the fact that they are impermanent. They will pass. This too shall pass. These hot flushes will pass. So we learn to kind of sit with that discomfort when it's there, because what happens is, what the human body does, or what we do, is when we're feeling any kind of discomfort, we contract around it. We don't want it there immediately. But sometimes when you learn to be with discomfort, when you learn to sit with what is uncomfortable, whether emotionally or physically, you are giving space to it. And more often than not, actually, it can transform the experience itself. And if it doesn't transform the experience as it unfolds, it can actually transform your relationship with that particular experience. So it's about cultivating a different relationship with the mood swings, with the hot flashes, to know what your body needs. How can I be kind to my body today as it's feeling this way? That too shall pass. And there's actually science behind that. There are some randomized control studies that have shown the benefits of some of these mindfulness practices in the menopause.
Right. Can I ask, maybe it's a bit of a personal question. When you went through your own experience of menopause, was this something that helped or was a game changer for you? Or how did you navigate that experience?
Right. The funny thing is, when I think was experiencing some of the menopause symptoms, I didn't even know. I mean, here I am, a doctor and menopause specialist, and it was kind of completely off my radar. We were living in this old house, which everything was breaking down around it. And then it was the heatings tend to break down. The radiators would go on and off, and it was a nightmare. Cut a long story short, we'd had engineers come in to look at our boiler, wasn't doing. They couldn't figure it out. Anyway, one time I was working in my study, and it started again. The radiator would go on and off, and so I'll whip off my jumper off because it's hot in the room. I'll put it back on because it's cold. Anyway, called the engineer again. Eventually, they came somewhere in that week. I went to look at whatever it is that they were looking with them, only to realize actually that at that moment in time, the boiler or the heating wasn't even on. So it wasn't.
I was waiting for the moment.
It wasn't the heating or the radiator going on. It was my own radiator going on and on. So that was really funny. I called a friend of mine, to answer your question, called a friend of mine. We had a good laugh about it. I've always had a sense of looking after myself. I run, I eat well, I practice mindfulness. And I think these qualities have served me well. They've made it because it's an ongoing transition depending on where you're at. So they've made it almost like, yeah, that acceptance of that's what is, and just some self-love, self-acceptance.
Oh, thank you for sharing your story. It's really,
Yeah,
it's relatable. I'm sure it's relatable to all of the women. And if we experience this internal radiator issue, you know what's happening.
Yeah. I think I'll have to reference this conversation to Guni in more than a couple of years, and vice
and
versa.
definitely in a couple of decades, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Wendy, thank you so much for all the insight, just enlightening us and like sharing your wonderful experience with us. And as we normally conclude our conversations, we have a rapid fire round of questions, which is, what is the first sign that you are out of balance?
Well, for me, when I'm really cranky, when all it takes is for my husband to look at me and I'm like, what? So that's like when I realize, oh, okay, I need to kind of just retrace my steps and just go and wake up properly and be mindful of what this body needs. So when I'm cranky.
The thing is that it takes a bit of time to recognize when you're cranky, right? Because like you're so much in it sometimes. So the second question.
And they are annoying anyway. So it's always their fault.
Yes.
Yeah, you've got that to come as well. So yeah, go on.
And so I guess the second question is, what is the method of coping when you do identify you're being cranky so that you can get back into balance?
Just take a step back. If it needs for me to just pause and just do a short breathing mindfulness practice to just ground myself, that's one way. Or I just put on my trainers and go out for a run. And when I come back, everything's fine with the world. Yes. So it's about having a few tools up your sleeves that you can deploy easily, because sometimes I just don't feel like running. So I'll stop, or maybe I'll just do a gentle yoga practice. So having a few things, they don't all have to be high octane. It's about having a sense of where there's a need.
I like that, having a few tools. And the last question is there one book that has impacted the way you approach wellness and health?
The book that was a kind of a game changer, a starting point to this journey, if you like, was a book by Susan Jeffers called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So because sometimes we can hold ourselves back for all manner of reasons and be held back by fear. Whereas fear, if we learn again to sit with the discomfort of fear, it's not going to kill me. It's just going to make me feel a little bit sick and uptight or whatever. If I can just ride that wave and do that one thing that I'm stopping myself from doing, it has just changed so many things and just allowed me to just not overthink things, to just not take myself too seriously all the time, to not be afraid to fall and to fail. Know that I can forgive myself and just pick myself up and go.
Great. I love that.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Yeah, I think I will have to look the book up. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and select that follow or subscribe button. For now, stay safe and we'll see you next week.